reschedule this again, just to make sure we have a full time. But yeah, yeah, let's do it. Where do you want to start, Corinne?
I can just introduce you quickly, very quickly. So for the people that been patient enough to stay online, you can see Aaron, and now you can hear him, which is good. So basically, Aaron has been exposed to the three principles for a long time. He originally learned about them with George and Linda Pransky, who happen to be also his uncle and aunt. And he worked for Pransky and Associates for 10 years and moved back to England. And he started One Thought and the Three Principles Professional Institute with Mara Glinton. I should know that. He worked mostly with organizations, but he also ran experimental projects in various settings.
Yeah.
He also worked as his time at Pransky and Associates, he worked with individuals and couples, and now he also helped Three Principle practitioners to deepen their understanding through the institute. So I've passed it on to Aaron. Go.
Thank you. I'm sorry that we're running so late, everybody. I really appreciate your patience, and for everybody who stuck with it, it's a lot of pressure on me to make it worth all that wait. So I'm glad you're sticking with us. And my original idea was to really, what I wanted to do is one of the things that's amazed me about being involved in the principles is just the endless learning of it. And I happened to be going through one of those periods where what I thought I knew turned out to be as much of a decoy as it was an insight. And I just wanted to share that with people because there's incredible richness to new learning because you're seeing the principles outside of your own thinking. And then what you've seen becomes part of your thinking. So, it kind of get in the way of seeing it. And then, at some point, you get another fresh glimpse outside of your thinking and all the things that you made up based on your insights, or all the ways in which you got stuck in your insights, or you translated your insights into a thought system and stopped seeing the principles kind of become evident. And it's a wonderful thing to have that freshness over and over again, and to slowly but surely get this humility and the realization that you can glimpse the principles, you can understand them, you're feeling them, they're real, they're true, but they're constantly, your thinking is constantly taking over and misdirecting you into a world of your own made-up principles, or your own interpretation of the principles, or your own construction of the principles. And I just find that amazing that keeps happening. The analogy that came to mind is, when you're really tired and you're reading a book, and you're reading the book, and then at some point, but you never know when, you're not reading the book, you're dreaming you're reading the book, and the book makes no sense whatsoever, but it takes you a while to realize that you're reading nonsense. You're not even reading, it's like you're reading it, and then as you fall asleep, your mind takes over, putting the image that you're reading a page, but there's no story there anymore, and you think you're reading, but you're actually not. Well, that's my experience of learning these principles, and there's a feeling to that, like there's a feeling to when I'm in my thinking about the principles, or I'm in my own made-up understanding of the principles, because it's all very comprehensible. 2 and 2 makes 4. I can categorize it, I can explain it in very rich detail, I can distinguish between things, I can pin it down. I have this very strong feeling that I know what I'm talking about, which is very different from the realization that you don't know, and you have no way to conceptualize it. What we mean by the principle, the way, this formless, infinite potential of life, we experience it moment to moment as a view of our world, but it is impossible to capsulate in your head. It's impossible to get a thought or a group of thoughts that encompasses that reality. So you'll notice that when you have an insight, you're getting a feel for it, you're getting a sense of something that has a feeling to it. But then when you think about it in your head, it feels different, feels like ideas, and ideas are very controllable, but the formless nature of the principles is completely uncontrollable and unconceptualizable. So there's a feeling of freshness and a feeling of energy and a feeling of clarity without the ability to pin it down. So this week I've been working with a client, and it's been fascinating because you could see this client getting clearer and clearer on the principles, such that he could see, oh, my thinking doesn't make sense. And actually, I'm fine and healthy and grounded and balanced. But when he went home and his family said, what you learned, he talked nonsense at them. And they thought, wow, I think he's completely psychotic. He's kind of on a high and he's making no sense whatsoever. And it's a fascinating illustration of how we move between a direct contact with the source of thought and the source of energy and the source of clarity, which has a feeling, like a feeling of freshness, of flow, of connectedness, which is the ability to know, the ability to have clarity, the ability to have insight. And then the results of that process, which is our thinking, which is very clear, very tidy, very conceptualized. And I'm constantly mistaking that conceptualized version of something real for the thing itself. And then my understanding gets very, very clear and defined, but completely hollow. So I'm very explicit and clear with my clients, but they get nothing from it. And at the moment, I'm kind of in one of those periods where it's all very real and very fresh, and you can have insights about the principles that you can't fit an understanding of it into your head. You can have a sense of it, kind of like walking around a dark room. You can feel where all the objects are because you keep bumping into them, so you can have a direct feel for it. But that's useful to have a direct feel for it, because you're feeling around and you're not banging into anything too hard. Whereas thinking where everything is doesn't help so much. If you run around with a mental map in your head, you probably bang into things because you come out of being in the moment and getting a feel for it live. And that's kind of what's been striking me, that I wanted to talk to you guys about. So I don't know if you want to ask me questions. I'm a little bit mindful of the time, and I don't know if people have questions. If you have questions, ping it to Corinne and we'll deal with the questions. But I thought it might be nice to kind of give a bit of an overview about the kind of learning that's led to this point, because I thought it might be interesting to you guys. When I first got involved in the principles, or when I first came across them, as far as I knew, George and Linda were psychologists. And to my way of thinking, psychology was a giant waste of time, because everything I heard about it was ridiculous, partly because I was arrogant and judgmental, and partly, or maybe it was all because I was arrogant and judgmental. I guess to an arrogant and judgmental person, everything looks ridiculous, unless they think it. So when they tried to get me interested in what they were doing, I just thought it was ridiculous, and I was very judgmental. And what was fascinating to me in terms of these two processes of living in a world of thought, but actually being the principles, right? So what was interesting is, when I visited them, they had me sitting on programs, and I would judge my way through the programs. Oh, that's stupid, these people are stupid, that's no good, because, like I would have this running commentary of all the reasons why I'd be an idiot to take it seriously what they were saying. And I was completely uninterested. I kind of vaguely tolerated it. But what was interesting is it did affect me. It did affect me. So when I was a very analytical, preoccupied person. So I had social anxiety, but I was also very preoccupied, and I was very arrogant about my own thinking. I wasn't a good listener, kind of in my own world. And in my own world, what they were talking about was complete rubbish. But something happened in my experience of life where my attachment to my own thinking and my preoccupation with my own thinking softened, such that I started to have a looser, nicer experience of life. And instead of my own analytical thinking over and over and over again, I started to have new experiences. Now, I didn't attribute that to what they were saying, but in hindsight, I could see it happening. And that's interesting to me, that in this world of made-up thought, I knew better than what they were saying. But in the world of what was actually happening, there was some resonance there, whether I thought it or not, whether I liked it or not. And I just find that fascinating, these two worlds. It's kind of this world of mental illusion where we make up things that feel real to us and that we often mistake for a reality. So when I'm working with people or supervising people, they'll often say, well, I know it's just thought, but that doesn't help. Okay? Well, that's a knowing in the theoretical made-up world of our thinking. If you know it's thought, but it doesn't help, it means it's an illusion that you know it, which you just think you know it, right? Because when you really know it, you relate to it differently. It's not like, I know this is just thought, but it won't work. It's like, oh, that's just thought. And it doesn't matter whether it's in your head or it disappears, because you know it's just thought. You don't worry about it. That's the world of feeling, the world of reality, the world of how you deal with things, rather than this made-up world of thinking, the made-up world of kind of the intellect. And I don't know, ego too strong a word for it? I don't know. But our ability to make things up in our head, to come to our own, to construct things with our thinking. Okay, and that's fascinating to me. That something that I thought was a load of rubbish, which turned out to be true, kind of got to me anyway. And it's funny because I see that with my clients. That we recently did a practicum, and the client that was on the practicum was arguing for the first 2 days, but calming down and feeling better. It was really funny because on the one hand they were saying that can't be true and that can't be true, and on the other hand they're calming down and they're getting a sense of their real self underneath their thinking, because they're feeling calmer, they're feeling more confident, they're realizing they have clarity, and that kind of world of feeling what's actually real and kind of seeing the results of it as thought is really interesting to me. So at some point, oh, there's a question. I have a question. How on earth do you teach it if you can only feel it? Perhaps a silent session, but who would know whether they got it? Yeah, I mean, you could not turn up. Hey, I'm not turning up. Well, what's interesting is, if you consider, so one of the things I wanted to say, which I'm going to rush through now, is I want to tell you a little story, Philip, and then I'm going to answer that question. There came a time when I realized that George and Linda understood something about human beings that I didn't understand. And ironically, it was along these lines where I thought that human beings were like computers, that if you didn't download software on it, that information did not exist. It was inaccessible to a human being, right? Whereas when I sat in on their work, I observed that 1 minute a human being can be confused and at a loose end, and the next minute they could be in extreme well-being and have all the answers. And that confused me because it didn't fit my model, my made-up reality. So I got interested in the principle. Now, because of the way I am, the way I've learned, as I would learn the principles, like just when you're falling asleep reading a book, I would get insights into the principles, and then I would kind of go off into my thinking. And because the insight was mind, consciousness, and thought, that we're living in a thought-created reality, and underneath that is an inconceivable power of mind that's always there, that we have perfect clarity, well-being, unlimited potential, spiritual oneness, that we kind of perfect, such as we are. We just get into thinking that makes it look and feel different, okay? I would get into my thinking about that, and I would mistake my thinking of mind is this, consciousness is this, thought is this, for the facts, see? And I'm in my own thinking about it. Now, what I've seen more recently is thought doesn't matter. In other words, the only reason we talk about thought is because it's a trickster, it's a decoy. So you are the intelligence of all things. You are clarity of mind. You are an understanding of the principles. You are what we talk about. But because it shows up as thought, and short thought kind of diffracts and reflects and makes things look different, it's easy to think something that's not real, in other words, your experience of thought, your experience of reality, as something that's real. Just like I mistook my insights for the principles, my thinking about the principles, or my conclusions based on my insights about the principles for the principles themselves. I did that. And the only relevance of thought is, well, that's how that happens. And a thought-based experience, or a made-up thought-based experience, has a shallower feeling than an in-the-moment alive experience of thought out of the blue, right? So in terms of Phyllis's question, how do you teach something that you can't fit into words? It's more, where are the words coming from? Like, are the words coming from your thought system, your mind, your intellect, your figuring out? Like, are they crisp? Are they crisp conceptual words, right? And it doesn't matter if those words say mind, consciousness, and thought. They're still just a bunch of words from a human being's understanding. Whereas when a person's mind is free, they kind of get what you might call inspired words, or words from clarity, or words of insight. And those words have more richness to them because they're less processed. Kind of like if you pick a broccoli and eat it, there's a lot more nutrition in it than if lots of things happen to that broccoli between eating it and picking it. Like it's picked, put in a warehouse, put on a truck, sent to a plant, frozen, put in another lorry. You get what I'm saying. So it's not really that we're saying, well, you're teaching a feeling. You're pointing to something that's real for everybody. So you don't have to teach someone in order for them to know. That's another thing that I've been realizing lately. So the last few clients I've been seeing, I'm realizing that I had the assumption that they didn't know. So I'm teaching them. And then another thing, and let me put you straight on this. Whereas now I'm realizing, Aaron, you're pointing to something that's real. So if you point, it's enough. You don't have to rub their face in it. And what's funny is people are finding their way to it in a much more simpler, clearer, quicker way than when I'm saying, let me explain it to you. And I give them a bunch of content that was a bunch of content, rather than we're pointing to something real. Everybody sees it, everybody feels it, everybody knows it, but it's disguised in thought. And we're engaging with people so that they get a chance to see it outside of their thinking. So you're still having words, you're having a conversation in words, but it's a very different conversation. Like when I have the idea I need to teach someone, it's a lecture. And it might be a lecture in a conversational form, but it's a lecture. And the assumption is I know and they don't, right? which I understand in some ways true. Like I have a feel for something, for a direction, for the reality of the principles, and maybe they don't as much. But that's different from pointing to something. If you're pointing to something, the fact that it's already there does the work. And there's much less effort required from me. And then if you say, well, you don't want to point from your mind, you don't want to point from your ideas, you don't want to point from your understanding, you want to point from your own feel for it, like in the moment, out and nothing. What makes sense? What comes to mind? And that's why we talk a lot about listening, because if you know that listening is a relationship to where thought comes from, then there's nothing you need to do to listen. And then listening allows you to have a purer relationship to mind, consciousness, and thought, and a less controlling relationship to mind, consciousness, and thought, and a less restricted relationship to mind, consciousness, and thought. And that's what I'm seeing, is it's my relationship to mind, consciousness, and thought, not my understanding in words and concepts and what's in my head. Now, I know this is probably basic to other people. I'm just showing that everybody has their own blind spots. And everybody has their own learning. So I don't know if that... So thanks for that comment. That's kind of what I wanted to get across in this session. And to share my experience of it, because it's very real at the moment, and there's something very fresh about it for me at the moment, and it's an interesting thing. I wanted people to see that you could be involved in this for a long time and spend a lot of that time in your own thinking about the principles, and still come to realize, oh, that's my thinking about the principles. And kind of get humbled again, and fresh again, and enlivened again, and grateful again. And I wanted people to have a feel for that, and I wanted people to benefit from kind of whatever freshness I see. So I'm welcome if people have any questions. I'm very mindful of going over time, even though I'm also mindful that we haven't had that much time. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. I can be with you another 5 minutes or so. We will reschedule this. When we'll have more time, I can give you the boring version. I can really string it out.
For everybody, if you want to ask questions, you can either raise your hand. There is a little icon with the hand towards the bottom of your screen, or send me a chat and I will unmute you so you can ask your question directly to Aaron. Thank you.
Well, I'll give you a minute, and I just was going to say one more thing that's been really interesting is getting more of a feeling for when you're in thinking about the principles versus your mind's free to have more of a less restricted relationship to the principles. Rather than having to relate to the principles through your thinking, to just kind of have an in-the-moment relationship to it, to the creativity of mind, to the moment-to-momentness of thought. It's a different feeling. It's a totally different feeling. Like I can feel in my sessions, I'll go in and out. Like I'll get kind of dry and analytical and kind of superficial, and then I'll get kind of really kind of rich and grounded and present, and you can feel it happening all the time, you know, which is just incredibly fascinating to me. Incredibly fascinating. And one of the things that I've appreciated is I've gone from seeing the principles as a syllabus. So if you caught me at a training a year ago and said, "What's going on, Aaron?" I said, "Well, I got to get through this syllabus. I gotta cover levels of consciousness, and then I gotta cover thought, and then there's mind and consciousness, and then I gotta put it all together for people, and be a day and a half before I can take any questions. Whereas now I'm looking at it, I'm saying, well, there's nothing there. That we're just looking at the essence of life as a formless energy, and that we're experiencing that, but it doesn't look like what it is. There's just one thing there. That's all there is. That's all we're dealing with. And the ways in which I thought I was seeing it simply, but I was complicating it, I kind of been getting a giggle out of that, you know. So I did a seminar recently in Sweden, and we sat down for the seminar. I'm like, well, we've got one thing to talk about. We've got 2 days to do it, and that's easy. And it was funny because at the seminar before that, I thought, well, we've got a few things to cover. I hope we can get it done in time. And it was so funny because the people in the seminar said, you know, the fact that you kept on and on about the same thing helped me realize it really is quite simple. And that's the other thing that people have been saying recently is, God, it's the simplicity that's so hard to comprehend. So my mind has been allowing me to tolerate the simplicity by making it a bit more complicated, a bit more my cup of tea. And that's helped me because it's been like a gateway drug, but it hasn't helped me in the sense that I haven't been able to see it directly, which I feel I'm more open to now. And it's very exciting to the simplicity that I might be able to see once I'm not trying to have any thought about it. But as Phyllis pointed out, that doesn't mean you can't express what you're pointing to or what you're experiencing, just like I've tried to do here. You know, I've probably used a couple thousand words. But instead of using the words as a substance, I'm trying to give you a sense for what I've been learning, what I've stumbled on. And one of the things I've stumbled on is your thinking will masquerade as something more than your thinking. Your masquerade is the actual principles. It's like having your kid turn up in a police outfit and try to give you a ticket. Anyway, I'm very, very sorry for the difficulties we've had, and I know we've lost, you know, some of the people as a result. We will schedule another one, and hopefully I'll have something to talk about then too. But thank you everyone for sticking with it. I hope it's been worth your while, even though we've only had about half an hour. But I'm going to have to go, I'm afraid. Sorry. Is that okay, Corinne?
Yes, thank you very much, Aaron, and thank you everybody for your patience. And sorry again for the technical difficulties we had, but we'll reschedule that, and the recording of that short session will be available to you in any case. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you next month. Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you, Aaron.
See you all soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.